She'd been sitting on that concrete wall for 4.5 hours, 7 years old, a library book in her lap, a backpack beside her like the only friend she had left. Her stepmom drove away that morning and never came back. No call, no message, nothing. And then you heard them before you saw them. 50 motorcycles, leather vests, road-worn faces that the world had already decided to be afraid of. They came around the corner and they saw her sitting there alone in the fading October light, and every single one of them stopped. What happened next in that Bakersfield parking lot, no one who was there will ever forget it, and neither will you. The morning Daisy Coleman was abandoned began exactly the way any other Tuesday in October began in Bakersfield. Dry, dusty, and indifferent to whatever small tragedies were unfolding beneath its wide, cloudless sky. The San Joaquin Valley sun had already climbed high enough to bleach the sidewalks by the time Sandra Coleman pulled her pale blue Chevy Malibu into the drop-off lane in front of Ridgeview Elementary School. It was 7:48 in the morning. School didn't start until 8. Daisy sat in the back seat, her backpack propped against her knees, her hands folded in her lap. She was 7 years old and small for her age, with dark brown hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails that she had done herself that morning because Sandra had still been in bed when Daisy woke up. She'd eaten a bowl of cereal, rinsed the bowl, and placed it in the drying rack because her father had told her that a clean kitchen was a form of respect, and she believed everything her father told her. She had learned early that small spaces could feel safer than big ones. The back seat of the Malibu was small, and she had learned to be still in it. "Get out," Sandra said. Her eyes didn't leave the windshield. Daisy unbuckled her seatbelt and slid out of the car, her sneakers hitting the warm asphalt. She turned back, one hand still on the doorframe. "Bye, Sandra." "Close the door." Daisy closed it. She stood on the sidewalk and watched the Malibu merge back into the drop-off lane traffic. She watched it until it turned left on Union Avenue and disappeared behind a row of oleander bushes that lined the road, the same bushes the street they lived on was named for. Then she adjusted her backpack straps and walked through the school's front gate. Room 14 smelled like crayons, and the particular kind of quiet that existed before children filled a space. Ms. Patricia Webb, Daisy's second-grade teacher, greeted each student at the door with their name and a brief, warm nod. She had been teaching at Ridgeview for 17 years and had developed the particular skill of noticing things children tried not to show. She noticed the uneven pigtails. She noticed the way Daisy's eyes drifted every few minutes toward the window that faced the parking lot. But the school day carried on in its steady institutional way. A reading group, a math worksheet about subtraction with small cartoon apples along the margins, a story read aloud about a boy who finds a stray dog and teaches his family to love it. At lunch, Daisy ate her peanut butter sandwich and half an apple and gave the other half to a boy named Tyler, who said he was still hungry. She didn't speak much at lunch. She rarely did. At 2:45 in the afternoon, the dismissal bell sent its bright mechanical cry through every hallway of Ridgeview Elementary. The building exhaled. Children streamed out through every door, calling to each other, dragging backpacks, pulling on jackets against the October afternoon that was still warm enough to make the jackets unnecessary. Daisy filed out with her class and took her place in the pickup zone beside the front gate, the spot where she always waited, the spot where Sandra's Malibu had pulled up every school day for the past 2 months. She waited. At 3:10, the last of her classmates was collected. A grandmother in a green minivan buckled a small boy into the 3rd row. A father jogged across the parking lot, still in his restaurant uniform, smelling of fryer oil, lifting his daughter off the ground when he reached her. A teenage sibling on a bicycle let the younger child ride on the handlebars because there was no one around to say otherwise. At 3:20, the gate area was empty except for Daisy. She sat down on the low concrete wall beside the gatepost and set her backpack next to her like a companion. The afternoon sun was still strong enough to warm the top of her head. She took out her library book, a hardcover about elephants with a torn laminate cover that she had borrowed from Ms. Webb and was still halfway through, though she had already read the ending, and opened it to where she had left off. The school secretary, Donna Marsh, came outside at 3:35, wiping her hands on a paper towel. "Sweetheart, are you still waiting?" "Yes, Mom," Daisy said. "She's probably just running late." Donna went back inside. Through the propped-open front door, Daisy could hear her on the phone. One call, then a pause, then another number, then a longer pause, then the soft, final click of the receiver being replaced on the cradle. Donna came back out at 4 with a paper cup of water and a solemn expression she was trying hard to make look casual. "I can't get a hold of your stepmom right now, honey. I'm going to try your daddy, okay?" "He works on the oil rigs," Daisy said, "out near Taft. Sometimes he can't answer." "I know, baby. We'll keep trying." By 4:30, the school building was nearly empty. The gymnasium had been locked. Ms. Webb had left after checking on Daisy twice and speaking in low, serious tones with Donna at the front desk. The American flag out front hung completely still, the air too calm to move it. Somewhere on Union Avenue, a car alarm went off and then stopped. Daisy had finished the elephant book and started it again from the beginning. She did not cry. She had taught herself not to. Somewhere in the space between the first time Sandra forgot to pick her up from soccer practice and the moment afterward when Sandra told Ray it was an honest mistake, and Ray had believed her because Ray loved Sandra, or had loved her once, or was trying very hard to keep trying. She sat very still on the concrete wall, her feet not quite reaching the ground, and she read about elephants who remembered everything, every kindness, every cruelty, every face from long ago, and she thought that this was a very sensible way to be. The October sun began its slow descent behind the apartment buildings that lined the far side of Union Avenue. The shadows of the school's chain-link fence stretched long and thin across the asphalt. Daisy turned a page. She was alone. But not yet afraid. That would take a little longer. The Bakersfield chapter of the Hells Angels did not consider themselves heroes. Marcus Holt, who had served as chapter president for 11 years and ridden motorcycles for 30, would have found the word faintly embarrassing. He was 48 years old, built like a man who had spent decades doing physical work because he had construction in his 20s, machine shop in his 30s, and the kind of manual labor that leaves permanent marks in the hands and the posture. He had a broad, weathered face, a grey-streaked beard trimmed to a practical length, and a scar on his left forearm from a chain that slipped in a garage in 1998. He wore his kuta, the denim vest bearing the chapter's patches, the way other men wore a second skin, without thinking about it because it had become inseparable from who he was. The chapter had spent the afternoon at the Elks Lodge on Chester Avenue for what Marcus privately called their Community Tuesday, a loose, standing gathering where members organized the annual toy drive, coordinated the charity poker runs, and mapped out the fundraiser schedule for families who had lost homes in the fires that swept through the valley every dry summer. The national reputation of the Hells Angels was what it was, and Marcus had long since made peace with the fact that the world would see the patches before it saw the men. What mattered to him was what the men actually did, and what they did in the back room of the Elks Lodge on Tuesday afternoons was plan ways to put Christmas presents in the hands of children who wouldn't otherwise have them. At 5:12 in the afternoon, Marcus led the column out of the Elks Lodge parking lot. There were 49 other riders behind him, a full chapter ride, engines firing up in sequence and merging into a collective sound that residents of Bakersfield had learned to recognize from 3 blocks away. They turned south on Chester, then east on California Avenue. a long, straight corridor that cut through the working-class grid of the city, where tire shops and taco stands and nail salons sat side by side with the careful coexistence of a neighborhood that had learned to make room. They passed Ridgeview Elementary at 5:18. Marcus would later say he almost missed her. The column was moving at 30 miles an hour, and the October light had gone that particular shade of amber that the valley air produced in the late afternoon, the kind of glow that softened edges and made distances harder to judge. But he saw her, a small girl, sitting alone on a concrete wall outside a school gate that was closed and padlocked, a backpack beside her, a book open in her lap. Still in the way that children are only still when they have been alone for too long and have run out of ways to keep themselves busy. Marcus signaled. The columns slowed, engines dropped in pitch. One by one, the motorcycles pulled to the right and stopped along the sidewalk in a line that stretched the full length of the block. 50 men in leather and denim, sitting astride machines that together represented 30 years of American road culture, looking at a small girl who looked back at them with the cautious, measuring expression of someone who had learned not to assign value to new things before testing them. Marcus cut his engine. He swung his leg over and dismounted and walked to the gate alone. The rest of the chapter stayed back. "Hey," he said, stopping a few feet from the wall, keeping his voice low and unhurried. "You okay?" Daisy studied him. She took in the vest, the patches, the beard, the size of him. She looked past him at the long line of motorcycles and the men watching from the sidewalk. "I'm waiting for my ride," she said. "How long have you been waiting?" A small pause. "Since school got out." Marcus checked his watch. It was 5:21. School had let out at 2:45. He did the math without saying anything about it. "Is there someone inside the school who knows you're here?" "Ms. Donner," Daisy said. "The secretary. She tried to call people, but I think she went home. I heard the door lock." Marcus turned and looked at the building. The lights were off. The parking lot behind the gate held 2 cars that likely belonged to overnight custodial staff. He pulled out his phone and dialed the school's main number. It went to a recording. He came back and stood near the wall, not too close. "What's your name?" he said. "Daisy." "Good name. I'm Marcus." She considered him. "You're a Hell's Angel." "I am. My dad says you guys are scary." "Your dad might be right," Marcus said. "What does your dad do?" "He works on oil rigs. He's not here right now." "And who was supposed to pick you up today?" The question landed in a silence that stretched just long enough to answer itself. "My stepmom," Daisy said. "Sandra." Behind Marcus, Vic Darnell had dismounted and was standing on the sidewalk with his arms crossed and his jaw set. He had 4 grandchildren and coached youth baseball on Saturdays, and he had heard every word of the exchange. So had most of the men closest to the front of the column. Nobody said anything, but the silence had weight. Marcus crouched so that his eyes were at the same level as hers. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "We're going to stay right here with you until someone comes to get you. Nobody leaves until you're safe. Is that all right?" Daisy looked at him for a long moment, with the careful, calibrated look of a child who had learned to take measurements before committing. "Okay," she said. She turned back to her book. Marcus stood and pulled out his phone again. This time he called the Kern County Sheriff's Department non-emergency line. He explained what he had found, where he was, and that he and his chapter would remain on scene until law enforcement arrived. The dispatcher asked him to repeat the part about the Hells Angels twice. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said both times, with the patience of a man who had spent a lifetime explaining himself to people who needed a moment to recalibrate. "All 50 of us." The first patrol car arrived at 5:38. Deputy Karen Fowler was a 14-year veteran of the Kern County Sheriff's Department, who had worked every shift and every corner of Bakersfield the city had to offer. She had developed over those years a particular discipline, the ability to take in an unexpected scene without letting her face tell on her. She pulled in slowly, left her lights off, stepped out of the cruiser with one hand resting near but not on her belt, and looked at what was in front of her. A line of Hell's Angels motorcycles stretching the full sidewalk of a school block, a small girl sitting on the wall among them in the fading afternoon light with a book in her lap, and one large man in a kuta crouching in front of the girl, talking to her the way a person talks to a child they don't want to frighten. Fowler was a short woman with a watchful expression and a practiced calm that she had assembled over years of exposure to things that warranted immediate reaction. She walked to the gate. "Evening," Marcus said, meeting her. "Marcus Holt. I called it in." "Deputy Fowler." She looked past him at Daisy, who watched from the wall with her book now closed in her lap. "How long has she been here?" "School let out at 2:45, Marcus said. "We found her at 5:18. Fowler's expression stayed level, but something shifted behind her eyes. She moved past Marcus and approached the wall, crouching in front of Daisy the same way every adult that evening had instinctively chosen to. "Hi there. My name is Karen. What's yours?" "Daisy Coleman." "How old are you, Daisy?" 7. "Can you tell me who was supposed to pick you up?" "My stepmom, Sandra Coleman." A pause that held more information than any sentence. "She didn't come. Do you know your dad's phone number?" "It starts with 661, Daisy said carefully. "But he doesn't always answer. He works on rigs." Fowler straightened and stepped away, her radio at her mouth. Marcus gave her the space. He could hear pieces. A name repeated, the word abandoned spoken once in a tone that indicated deliberate professional usage, a case number being generated in the system. A second patrol car arrived at 5:52, then a third. The presence of 50 Hells Angels motorcycles in front of an elementary school had, as Marcus had predicted, generated a level of dispatch attention that a single missing child call typically did not. The men of the chapter stayed on the sidewalk. They didn't cluster and they didn't disperse. When Deputy Reyes, young and visibly uncertain, walked the line with his hand near his hip, Vic Darnell met his eyes and raised both open palms. "We called it in," Vic said. "We're staying until she's safe." Reyes looked at the line of men. He looked at the girl on the wall. He looked at Marcus, who met his gaze with the uncomplicated steadiness of a man who had nothing to prove. Reyes lowered his hand. "All right," he said. Inside the building, Fowler had found the night custodian and gained access to the front office. She pulled Daisy's emergency contact file and worked through every number on it. Sandra Coleman's cell went directly to voicemail. The home number on Oleander Avenue rang 16 times before the automated system cut the call. A secondary contact, Sandra's sister in Fresno, answered and said she hadn't heard from Sandra in 3 days and had no idea where she might be, and the particular flatness with which she said it suggested that this was not entirely surprising to her. Ray Coleman's rig supervisor answered on the second ring. He said Ray was in the middle of an active shift on the platform, but that reaching him was possible and he would make it happen. He asked if everything was all right. Fowler told him there was a situation involving Ray's daughter that required his immediate attention. "God!" the supervisor said. "I'll pull him off the platform right now." Outside, Marcus sat beside Daisy on the wall. Not too close. He had raised a daughter of his own, and he understood that proximity could feel like pressure when a child was already carrying too much. "You like elephants," he said, nodding at the cover of the book. "They remember everything," Daisy said. "Even people who were kind to them a really long time ago. They go back and find them." "That's something worth knowing," Marcus said. "Do you have kids?" "A daughter. She's 23 now." "Does she live with you?" "She's up in Sacramento. But she calls me every Sunday." Daisy considered this. "My dad calls me when he can," she said. "Sometimes the signal doesn't reach the rigs." "That happens out there," Marcus said. "He told me it wasn't his fault," Daisy said. "He told me the first day he left." Marcus nodded. He did not fill the silence that followed, because some silences were not meant to be filled. Behind him, Dutch, a quiet, observant man of 55 who spoke rarely but never missed anything, had disappeared behind his motorcycle and reappeared holding a leather jacket. He held it out in Marcus's direction without a word. Marcus looked at Daisy. "You cold?" She was. She hadn't said so. Marcus draped Dutch's jacket over her shoulders. It swallowed her entirely, the sleeves hanging past her knees, the collar up around her ears. She didn't take it off. Deputy Fowler returned at 6:20 with the particular expression of someone managing a contained and deliberate anger. "I cannot locate the stepmother," she said quietly, keeping her voice from reaching Daisy. "We have a mandatory CPS report at this point. They've been notified, but tonight's response time is over 2 hours. "We'll stay," Marcus said. Fowler looked at him steadily. "I want to be straightforward with you, Mr. Holt. There are going to be people who have questions about this situation." Marcus looked at the line of 50 men who had spent the afternoon planning a toy drive and had not yet been offered a single word of acknowledgement from anyone in an official capacity. "There always are," he said. She held his gaze. Then she gave a single small nod and went back inside. On the wall, Daisy opened the elephant book again. She read the same page twice, slowly, as though the words required more effort than usual. Then she closed it again and held it in her lap. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah. Why did you stop? You didn't have to." Marcus thought about this for a moment, giving the question the honesty it deserved. "Because you were there," he said, "and no one else was." Daisy turned the book over in her hands. "Okay," she said. The evening settled around them. The faint hum of a distant highway, the bark of a dog somewhere on Union Avenue, the soft sound of 50 men standing quietly in the dark. Sandra Coleman appeared at 7:14 in the evening. She drove the pale blue Malibu slowly into the school parking lot, easing past the 3 patrol cars parked at angles across the entrance, past the line of motorcycles that ran the full length of the sidewalk, past the cluster of deputies and the small figure on the concrete wall with an oversized leather jacket around her shoulders, and she pulled into the far end of the lot with the unhurried precision of someone arriving for a routine appointment that had perhaps run a little long. She was 34 years old, with highlighted hair and careful makeup, and the particular composed stillness of a person who had made a decision in advance and was prepared to defend it. She stepped out and walked toward the gate. Deputy Fowler moved to intercept her before she reached it. "Ms. Coleman?" "That's me." Sandra's eyes traveled to Daisy on the wall, then came back to Fowler with a calmness that was too deliberate to be genuine. "I'm here for my daughter." "Your stepdaughter," Fowler said. The correction was quiet, precise, and entirely intentional. "Can I ask where you've been this afternoon?" "I had some things to take care of." Her arms crossed. "Is she okay?" "She's been sitting on that wall since 2:45, Fowler said. "It is now 7:14. That is 4.5 hours. I lost track of time. We attempted to reach you starting at approximately 3:30 this afternoon. Every number listed in your stepdaughter's school file went unanswered. Your cell phone went directly to voicemail. I had my phone off. For 4.5 hours. Sandra's jaw tightened. "I said I had things to take care of." Fowler held the gate with one hand. Her voice remained level and unhurried, the way a person speaks when they have made the deliberate choice not to let emotion compromise precision. "Miss Coleman, I need you to understand that what occurred here today has generated a mandatory report to Child Protective Services. A 7-year-old child was left at a school with no supervision, no contact, no alternate arrangement for over 4 hours. That is now a matter of formal record, regardless of the explanation. She's your stepdaughter, Fowler said for the second time, and right now I need you to stay here and answer some questions before we proceed any further. From the wall, Daisy watched Sandra. She did not move toward her. She did not call out. She sat with Dutch's jacket pulled tight around her small frame and her library book held in her lap, and she watched with an expression that was very still and older than a 7-year-old's face had any right to be. The expression of someone who had not been surprised and who had perhaps been quietly preparing for exactly this for a long time. Marcus watched, too. He had raised a daughter through childhood and into adulthood, and he had watched, over those years, the precise way children orient toward the people who hold authority over their lives. The lean forward or the lean back, the face that opens or the face that closes. What he saw on Daisy's face was not the expression of a child separated from someone she needed. It was the expression of a child who had always known, somewhere below the level of words, that this particular person could not be fully counted on. At 7:31, Fowler's radio crackled. She stepped away, listened, and when she came back, the weight she had been carrying all evening was heavier. She walked to where Sandra stood near the gate and spoke in a voice that Marcus positioned himself carefully to hear. What she said was this. A colleague had reached Ray Coleman via the rig supervisor. Ray was already off the platform and in a vehicle heading toward Bakersfield. During that call, something had come out, the way things come out when a man is frightened and moving fast and doesn't have the resources left to be careful. Ray had told the supervisor in short and urgent fragments that he and Sandra had been in a serious argument 2 days ago, that Sandra had said she was leaving, that Ray had said she could leave, but Daisy stays with me, and that Sandra had said, we'll see about that. 2 days later, Sandra had packed a bag, dropped Daisy at school and driven in the opposite direction. Fowler let that information settle in the air between them for a moment. Then she said, Ms. Coleman, you're going to stay right here. Sandra looked at the deputies. She looked at the motorcycles lining the block. She looked at the 50 men in leather who were watching her from the sidewalk with the same patient, deliberate stillness they had maintained for 2 hours. She looked at Daisy on the wall. This is a misunderstanding, she said. Her voice was less steady than before. That may be, Fowler replied, but it is a misunderstanding that now has a formal report, a CPS intake, an active investigation, and 50 witnesses attached to it. And you are going to stay here and account for yourself. Marcus walked back to the wall and sat beside Daisy. You doing all right? He said. She left on purpose, Daisy said. It was not a question. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He believed in being honest with children, because children generally already knew the truth and were simply waiting to see if an adult would confirm it. I don't know all the details, he said, but I know for certain that you didn't do anything wrong. Daisy turned the book over in her hands. The elephants remember the bad things too, she said, not just the good things. The book says so. That sounds right, Marcus said, but they still go back to find the people who were kind. Yeah, Marcus said, they do. CPS intake worker Daniel Foster arrived at 8:05. A young man with the slightly overwhelmed look of someone new enough to his work that the weight of each case still landed fresh. He spoke with Fowler, then with Sandra, then crouched in front of Daisy the way every adult that evening had instinctively chosen to, asking her careful questions in a careful voice. Daisy answered each one completely and in full sentences, the way she had been taught. At 8:40, Sandra Coleman was formally detained for questioning under California Penal Code Section 270, child endangerment. She said things, in the moments before Deputy Reyes guided her toward the patrol car, that Marcus chose deliberately not to retain, because some words took up residence and he had no intention of giving them space in his head. Two of the angels near the front of the motorcycle line watched the arrest in complete silence. Ron Briggs, a retired schoolteacher who rode on weekends, turned away and looked at the road for a moment. Then he turned back. His expression was composed, but his voice, when he spoke, was quiet and entirely certain. "Good," he said. Around him, several of the men nodded once. Nobody elaborated. Nobody needed to. Ray Coleman arrived at Ridgeview Elementary at 9:47 in the evening. He came in a rental car, still in his work clothes, canvas pants stained at the knees, a long-sleeve thermal shirt, steel-toed boots. He was 36 years old and looked in that parking lot light as though the drive from the rig platform had aged him further. He had been on a helicopter, then a car, for close to 3 hours, traveling from a platform in the middle of the valley to this specific block of California Avenue with his supervisor's words in his ear and a cold, insistent dread in his chest that had not relented for a single minute of the journey. He saw the motorcycles first. 50 of them, still there, lined in a column along the full length of the sidewalk. The men had not left. Some had ridden out for food and come back. Dutch had retrieved a small portable heater from a saddlebag and positioned it at a respectful distance from the wall, and its low orange glow had kept the edge of the October night from reaching Daisy, who was still on the wall, still in the same spot, asleep now with her head resting against Marcus's shoulder and Dutch's leather jacket pulled tight around her small frame like something that had always been hers. Ray stopped at the gate. Marcus saw him from across the parking lot and recognized the posture immediately, the controlled forward lean of a man containing something enormous and not entirely succeeding. Marcus raised one hand briefly. "The situation is in hand. Nothing is wrong that can't be fixed." Ray came through the gate and crossed the parking lot. He crouched in front of his daughter, the way every adult had crouched that evening, and the difference, the only difference, was that when Daisy opened her eyes and saw his face, she reached for him immediately with both arms, without hesitation, the way she had when she was much younger and the world was newer, and she had not yet had occasion to learn that it was sometimes safer to wait before extending yourself. "Dad," she said, "I'm here." His voice broke on the second word, and he made no attempt to recover it. "I'm right here." He held her for a long time, long enough for Daisy to stop shaking in the way she had been shaking very slightly since the sun went down, a shaking that had nothing to do with the cold, because the heater Dutch had set up was doing its job and everything to do with the accumulated weight of a very long afternoon. When Ray finally straightened, with Daisy held close against his side, he looked at Marcus. He looked at the line of 50 men who had stayed the entire evening and into the night. Ray Coleman was not often at a loss for words. A decade of oil rigs had given him a directness that most people spent years developing. But standing in front of 50 Hells Angels at 9:45 at night outside his daughter's school, he found that most of what he wanted to say was too large for the available words. "She was alone for 4.5 hours, he said. "Yes," Marcus said, "and you found her." "We did." Ray looked at Daisy, who had her face pressed against his shoulder. Then he looked back up. There was something in his expression that went past gratitude, the particular quality of a man who is looking at the people who did the thing he should have been there to do himself, and who is carrying that weight alongside everything else. "Thank you," he said. And then, after a moment, "I don't have anything that covers it." "You don't need to cover it," Marcus said. "She's a good kid." "She's the best kid I've got," Ray said. He paused. "She's the only kid I've got." "I know," Marcus said. "She told me." Deputy Fowler gave Ray a thorough briefing, the timeline from 2:45 to the present, Sandra's detention, the CPS report and its implications, the documentation that had been generated, the next steps he would need to take, and the legal contacts he would need to make. Ray listened with the focused, absorptive attention of a man who had spent years receiving safety briefings in high-stakes environments, cataloguing information under pressure and acting on it without delay. His hands, holding Daisy, were not entirely still, but his eyes were. "What happens with Sandra?" he asked. "That will be a matter for the DA's office," Fowler said, "but child endangerment charges are on the table, and the evidence trail is thorough. The school's records, the CPS intake, the sheriff's report, the timeline. And we're all witnesses," Marcus said. He said it without particular emphasis, just as a statement of fact. Fowler looked at him. "Yes," she said, 50 of them. The paperwork took another 40 minutes. CPS cleared Daisy to go home with her father. Ray was the biological parent. The documented concern was specific to Sandra's conduct, and the intake worker's assessment was that Daisy's immediate needs were best served by returning to familiar surroundings in her father's care. A neighbor on Oleander Avenue, a woman named Carol, who had known Ray since he moved onto the block, agreed to come stay at the house until Ray had made the calls he needed to make. At 10:32, Ray buckled Daisy into the rental car's back seat. She was mostly asleep, moving on the quiet automatic pilot of a child whose body had given up on staying awake, but whose mind was still loosely present. Just before Ray closed the door, she opened her eyes. She looked through the window at the line of motorcycles, at the men in their leather vests, standing in the October night, with their hands in pockets, or their arms folded across their chests. Their weight shifted to one boot, the particular way men stand when they have decided that something matters and they are in no hurry to stop standing by it. "Marcus," she said very quietly. Ray heard her. "What about him, Daisy?" "He stayed," she said. "All of them stayed." Ray looked back at the line of men. Marcus stood at the front, arms at his sides, watching the car with the same steady, uncomplicated attention he had given everything that evening. Ray raised a hand. Marcus raised one back. Ray started the car. As he turned out of the parking lot and onto Union Avenue, he watched in the rearview mirror. Behind him, the column of motorcycles began to start up. One engine, then another, until the sound built from a murmur to a low collective thunder that filled the October night and rolled down the street and pressed gently against the windows of the rental car. He watched the headlights come on in sequence. 50 lights, amber and steady, lined along the block. He made the turn. In the mirror, the column turned too. 1 block, 2. And then, at the corner of California Avenue, it slowed and stopped. They did not follow him home. They did not need to. They had already done what needed to be done. 3 weeks later, Sandra Coleman was formally charged in Kern County Superior Court under California Penal Code, Section 270. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea. The prosecutor's office, given the documentation, the witnesses, and the clarity of the timeline, noted internally that the case was, by the standards of their docket, straightforward. Daisy went back to Ridgeview Elementary on the following Monday. Ms. Webb noticed that the pigtails were more even. Ray had been practicing on YouTube tutorials every morning before school. Room 14 still smelled like crayons and dry erase markers. The elephant book was back on the classroom library shelf, its torn laminate cover now secured with a careful strip of clear tape that Daisy had applied herself, pressing it smooth with her thumbnail, the way she had seen her father do with tape when something needed holding together. On the last Saturday of October, the Bakersfield chapter held its annual Toy Drive charity ride through the valley. The column came down California Avenue the way it always did. 50 engines, 50 riders, the sound announcing itself a full block before it arrived. They passed Ridgeview Elementary at 11:20 in the morning. A small girl was standing on the low concrete wall near the front gate, not abandoned this time, waiting. Her father stood beside her, Ray Coleman in clean jeans and his good boots, holding 2 thermoses of coffee, one for himself and one he'd brought for the occasion, even though there was no one specific to give it to. As the column came around the corner, Daisy straightened on the wall. Marcus Holt, riding at the front, saw her from half a block away. He slowed slightly, the engine dropping to a lower note, and as the column passed the gate, he raised 2 fingers from the handlebar. The way riders acknowledge each other on the road, easy and unhurried, the gesture that means I see you and all is well. Daisy raised her hand. The column moved on. The sound of 50 engines faded down California Avenue, around the bend, and out into the wide October morning. Daisy watched until the last echo was gone. Then she looked up at her father. "They're good people," she said. "Yeah," Ray said. He hadn't known what to expect from this morning, from any of the mornings since he'd driven home from this very parking lot with his daughter asleep in the back seat. But he knew what he was looking at right now. They really are. She turned the empty thermos over in her hands, a habit she had, handling objects that needed thinking about, and looked down the long, quiet road. Some things, once they happened, couldn't be unmade. The choice Sandra made, the hours on the concrete wall, the patience that no 7-year-old should have needed to have. But some things couldn't be unmade in the other direction either. 50 engines that had stopped, 50 men who had stayed, a leather jacket still hanging on a hook in the Coleman hallway because Dutch had, so far, not asked for it back, and Daisy had not offered to return it, and somehow both of them seemed to understand that this was perfectly fine. She looked at the empty road for a moment longer. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. Can we come back next Saturday to watch them ride?" Ray put his arm around her and looked down at the top of her head. The 2 even pigtails that had taken him 11 tries to get right that morning. "Every Saturday," he said, "for as long as you want." She leaned into his side the way children lean into the people they trust absolutely, with the full, uncalculated weight of themselves. That was how justice looked, that October morning in Bakersfield. Not a courtroom, not a verdict, not a formal declaration from any institution. It looked like a column of motorcycles ridden by men the world had already made up its mind about, who stopped anyway, who stayed anyway, who made sure that a 7-year-old girl on a concrete wall with a library book about elephants was not alone in the world. And she wasn't. She never really had been. She just hadn't known it yet.